I've been a Bitcoin Core developer since February 2019, thanks to Luke Dash Jr., who's Dasher's proposal in April 2024 as well, BIP's editor maintainer, along with several other fine people. Quick about me, I speak 5 languages. Learning Spanish, aprendo español. I wrote pro games in assembly language as a teen. I was a product manager, marketing manager at L'Oreal in Paris, following an MBA. I organized stadium concerts in Russia, and I went back to my software roots, saving asses for European multinationals when they were in trouble. And I've been in El Salvador now for 3 years. I started in an informal circular Bitcoin economy in the small rural town of Tamanique. You wouldn't imagine that anyone there would accept Bitcoin, but in fact, I do everything I need for my daily life in Bitcoin. I live completely using Bitcoin here in El Salvador. It is not necessarily easy, but it is possible. I advise the Ministry of Education in helping them with their new university curriculum in computer science and Bitcoin protocol development. That's the Ministry of Culture. I help the Bitcoin office, volunteer teaching at the Cubo Plus programs, which are really a lot of fun. There's some good kids, some good students. And I've been building for the past 2+ years a world-class Bitcoin protocol research and development center here in El Salvador. Hopefully one day, I'm a little early I think, but hopefully one day we can transform its role in the global Bitcoin ecosystem. It looks like this. I built it in the middle of nature. I didn't cut a single tree. Why El Salvador? Well, real quick, because it's amazing, but it's also a lot of challenges. The Bitcoin law brought me in here first. The nature is amazing. You have world-class surfing. You can raise cattle. You can go off-road. And I started learning to ride off-road motorcycling with friends here in El Salvador. Now, Bitcoin code governance. We're going to be talking about 3 things today. We'll start with the BIPs, and then we'll cover the Bitcoin development mailing list, and if we have time, Bitcoin Core. So the Bitcoin improvement proposals, the BIPs. How many people know what the BIPs are? Basically, it's the research and development specifications for changes, or sort of a record of specifications to help define Bitcoin. A lot of it right now is future forward thinking. So for many years, the process was a bit more informal. With just 1 or 2 editors, you didn't need as much structure. Luke is the OG maintainer. Editor, they call them BIP editors, but they're also maintainers, along with other people who, like Calais or Gregory, who had periods as well. And then after a fairly ugly, frankly, and contentious nomination process, 5 more editors were added in April 2024, because basically everybody who was nominated was accepted because there was no sort of agreement on who. So they just let everybody in, and then it sort of sorted itself out over time. The BIP's activity has increased a great deal in the last 1.5 years, nearly 2 years. Many new BIP drafts, a lot more work. I thought as well, Merch, who is also the most active with me, we both thought it would be sort of a couple hours per week on the side while we continued working on Bitcoin Core. It turned out to be a lot of work. So the workflow has adapted. There's a little bit more coordination. Occasionally, I dislike moderating, but we've had to moderate when the things got heated. My personal preference is not to ban people. I've never called for someone to be banned. Occasionally, someone has been. I try to bring people around without banning them because I reckon they'll just come back anyway with a pseudo. So in practice, it isn't easy. We tend rather than deleting comments outright, we tend to just hide them. So people who really, really want to see the spam or whatever it is can see them. Something that surprises me to this day is how important the importance people place on the choice of BIP number. We've talked about that in the past. It surprises me how important this number versus that number can be to people. Some people seem to be really concerned about the validation that they can get by being a BIP author. I've been surprised by the effect writing a BIP can have on an author's life. I've seen careers completely transformed because they proposed a BIP draft. So, really quickly, how can you succeed with your BIP proposal? The process matters. You need to read the process BIP. It used to be for a very long time BIP 2. It has just recently been replaced by BIP 3. In my opinion, they're very similar. The main difference being that BIP 3 makes it a little bit more easy to adapt and change and update the process without having to write a new BIP. The rest are mostly technical changes, in my humble opinion. To succeed, don't take shortcuts. The ends don't justify the means. Don't try to Don't try to skip the steps. It really will help you if you have shown a record of past proof of work. Now that we have more and more AI abuse and slop being thrown over the fence at us, and it's really hard to know what's good and not good without spending way too much time. Do your homework, do your research. Don't let AI do it all for you. Respect the people who have to read what you're proposing. Don't begin by opening a pull request in the BIPs. We've seen a whole wave of people just starting with a pull request in the BIPs. Please discuss your idea first on the mailing list, and later discuss your proposed draft on the mailing list. Don't skip the mailing list steps. Don't skip the community discussions. Don't try, this is not new, don't try to choose or self-assign a BIP number. And the number of people who really are experienced, deeply experienced experts on these topics are very few. Don't waste their time. Their plates are full. Everybody's asking for their attention. Don't be entitled about it. Respect them and give them proper quality content and ideas. Take them step by step. Start with the idea. If the idea is dumb, there's no point in sending us a complete AI-generated slop. Bitcoin dev mailing list. So there's been a bit of controversy lately. Is there censorship going on? Is a new mailing list needed? Well, what's really happening behind the scenes when people think there's censorship? The list is moderated. It's important to keep a minimum quality of content because you want to keep the list valuable and useful and readable for the very few experienced people who give feedback and who are competent, really deeply competent, to give the review that's needed. So you have to balance the need for that list to be valuable to them with openness to authors' posts and quality of life for the moderators. People think that they send a post in and it's just a click and it's through, but actually the queue can be quite long. And sometimes people send multiple posts multiple times, the same one, which doesn't help life for the moderators. So another thing you want to do, for example, the cat recently, there was a bit of a kerfuffle because they were saying they were being censored. They had sent, I think, 6 different versions of the same post. And it got stuck in the queue because, well, we're getting spammed with all these versions. It looks sort of like AI. The idea isn't necessarily, it's controversial. And during the discussion on that, that same author got upset because their reply was not published. It was not published because they didn't reply to the list. They replied just to Gregory Maxwell. So, 1, don't send multiple posts of the same. 2, reply to the list and not to just one person. Otherwise, it will not be seen and will not be published. It's not censorship. How submissions are really handled, it's a human process. Imagine you have 2 moderators. One is a bit quicker to respond, maybe a bit older, more seasoned, a little bit less patient with nonsense, and a little more grumpy. Maybe they take a look at your post and think, I don't want to waste my time on this. I'll look at it later, or I'll leave it for my other colleague. Then you maybe have another colleague who's a bit younger and a little bit more open-minded, handles the list a little less often, maybe once a week he'll go through it. And maybe they'll approve the one that the other one didn't want to spend his time on. And in some cases, when there's just when the post isn't really of high quality, or it's really contentious, or it's grandstanding, or it's just not really, or it looks like AI, they might just leave it aside and then wait for what could be called a dumb day, where rather than spamming the list with the bad stuff every single day, they let all the bad ones through on one day, like after a fortnight. And so sometimes if your post isn't very good, it will still get through. It's not being censored. It just you might need to be patient for it to go through on the day when they batch all the ones they don't like and just let them through. So that's how it really works. There's not active censorship going on. Basically, though, if you're a known quantity, if you've shown human proof of work over time, that garners respect and that helps you get published more quickly. So send quality posts, stay humble, don't grandstand, don't cry censorship, don't abuse AI. If it looks like AI, try not to do that. Do your history homework. Has your idea been proposed before? Have there been reactions to your idea already 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 years ago? Do your research. All right, Bitcoin Core. How much time do we have? Oh, lots of time. Okay, I'm moving quickly. 18 minutes. Bitcoin Core. So I've been involved full-time on Bitcoin Core since 2019, though in the past 2 years, my activity in Bitcoin Core has gone way down for various reasons. Bitcoin Core has different entities. You have the developers. On a given day, you might see 5 to 15 people active on the GitHub repository. Generally, there has been between 4 and 6 maintainers, and generally, I believe we've been stable at around 4 project owners. I could be wrong. that's more context. You have to really be watching to know who the project owners are. I'm not going to say who they are, but someone who's a keen observer will know. Personally, I found that the social dynamics are critically important on a project like this, and so since the beginning in 2019, I have made it my business to follow all the human interactions and try to understand the human process and social dynamics of what is going on. Because open source is fairly political, and that hasn't changed. In fact, it's maybe gotten worse in the recent years, and we might get into that a little bit gently. Finally, you have funding organizations and you have offices, and they are run by CEOs, or some of them also sort of take on the role of a product manager with respect to Bitcoin. So they might influence funding, they influence who can work full-time in their offices, giving them credibility, and they might even provide direction or amplify the views of a few core developers who they are close to, who they use as trusted proxies to know who is good or not, what is going on or not, and amplify those views into action. And a handful of these organize what are called the core development private conferences, which, in my opinion, gives them a fair bit of power, centralization power. I'm not going to get into that further for now, but core devs basically are meetings twice a year where they're private, where all the core developers who are sort of appreciated are invited to a private summit. And those are organized by these funding organizations and offices. So they have influence, money, and who is invited to these events. Bitcoin Core, for about a decade, had what was called a lead maintainer. This person, the last lead maintainer since 2014, in April 2014, Vladimir van der Laan was made lead maintainer, replacing Gavin Andresen. My personal inspiration for working on Bitcoin Core came from Vladimir. He was a role model to me. He set the tone, the leadership style of the project. He held the overall disparate group together. He arbitrated, he made decisions of last resort, the buck stops here, and he handled the release management. He was burning out. It was clear for years that he was burning out. He'd been there a full decade. The weight of, as the stakes have grown increasingly higher with Bitcoin's value in the world, the weight on his shoulders grew stronger, as well as the continual attacks by a certain fake Toshi, which did not help and caused a lot of distress among the people who were named. I personally was named in the last round, but some people, like Luke and I believe Peter Todd is in the room, have been named for years and years and years on these legal attacks. And that weighed on that person as well as other core developers. So we lost our lead maintainer in 2022, and the decision was sort of informally made not to have any more lead maintainer. And that, in my opinion, people saw for years and years that this was coming, and there was no formal transition set up, but there was behind the scenes a lot of, I would say, knife sharpening for who would grab the power when that person stepped down, as they saw would be coming one day. So the context of the core maintainers has changed completely over time. When I joined in 2019, we had basically maintainers were lone individuals spread out all over the world. We had one in Holland, one in Switzerland, one in New Zealand, a German who for a time was in New York and now is in the Nordic countries, but no longer a maintainer. One from Belgium who was in San Francisco at the time, and a new one named in June 2019 from Australia. So Holland, Switzerland, New Zealand, Germany, Belgium, Australia. Not terribly Americanized, spread all over the world. That has completely changed. Every one of these maintainers has since stepped down. In their replacement has been mostly Americans. And they have been centralized. At one point, 3 out of 4 were working in one office in London. Now that's a bit more spread out. There's one in San Francisco. There were 2 in New York and 2 in London. So there's been a centralization. People no longer working from home, spread out all over the world from lots of different countries. It was more similar culture in offices. And one of them that is in London was originally in the Ukraine as well. I forgot to mention the Ukraine in the list of countries. So what happened? We had a leadership transition. OGs who had been lead maintainers or maintainers since 2011, 2014, whatever, the mid-20s, 2010s, were burning out, which is human, which is natural, and who was going to take their place was the question. And for example, Peter Weyler was a maintainer. The legendary developer Peter Weyler was a maintainer, but he was, the last 2 years before stepping down, he was not merging. He was more interested merging. He was not doing the role of a maintainer per se. He was more interested in doing research, taking it backstage, more research and development orientation, which I believe fits him. So we had a transition of leadership. But where are the replacements like Wampus, which was Vladimir Vlanderland, SIPA, Peter Weyler, Gregory Maxwell, A.J. Towns, these OGs, people like Luke? Where are the replacements for the individual sovereign individuals who were there in the early days who maybe had a good Bitcoin stack? You have these new young people coming in, but what have you selected for? And I think that plays a role in why we don't have similar stature of leaders now while the stakes are much higher. So what happened was a leadership transition needed to be done, and what was selected for was basically people willing to come in and work in the offices in the large blue cities of New York City and later in San Francisco, mainly New York City. Chain Code Labs was the leader in working on the developer pipeline. I was personally myself trained at Chain Code Labs in New York City in June of 2019, along with about a dozen other developers. There was a centralization. I would consider it the baseball training league. The organizer of that program was previously a town scout in baseball, so the analogy fits. But basically, they were scouting who was going to be good. There were two women, and there were about 10 men, 12 men. And right before that program began in June 2019, in May 2019, the Blue Matt Corallo, and others started online tweeting about a DEI push and need for diversity. So we had a cultural change that began right as I was invited for the first time as a new developer to Chain Code Labs in New York City, and I saw with my own eyes how things were becoming Americanized. It was about diversity, your gender mattered, your things you couldn't change about yourself, your skin color suddenly became important, and we all know what happened, the DEI push of the last 5 years, half decade, which is maybe on the wane now since a year or two. But what that happened was that created a few people that were funded, the red carpet was rolled out for them, and they got funding immediately, while the others who didn't fit the identity characteristics struggled very, very mightily. It took me a year to get funding. I have friends who took 3 or 4 years to get funding who are still active today on Bitcoin Core, while other people, they were funded immediately, and they had OG mentors leading them, grooming them to become essentially future maintainers and leaders. So that's what happened. People like to say that maintainers are just janitors or code gardeners or pulling up the weeds. And sure, that would be nice, and that's often been a valuable description for the role. But in Bitcoin Core, it has much more power than that. There are dynastic effects. People stay until they burn out and step down. There's not a regular rotation like you do it like jury duty for a year or 6 months, and then you pass the torch on. There's no passing of the torch plan. People stay until they burn out. That creates dynastic effects, where people hoping to get their changes approved and merged, they treat maintainers with much more deference and respect. And I've personally seen that when you become a core developer, your whole life changes when you get your first serious funding. Then you're taken much more seriously, and things work much more easily for you. And then later on, if you become a maintainer, you're given another level of respect. And I suppose that sounds logical, but that means that there are dynastic effects. It was brought up several times whether there should be more of a jury duty role instead, where basically maintainers don't write code, they just review other people's code, which is mostly what Vladimir Vanderland was doing the last few years. He was essentially reviewing and merging. And that could be boring for people who prefer writing code to doing review, but it could be 3 to 6 months or a year of selfless service, and then go back to writing code and proposing changes. I don't think that gained traction. It has been proposed for the BIPs maintainers, but not yet seriously for the Bitcoin Core maintainers. So I've seen different analogies for how this ends up being in terms of power structure. You have a little clique of power Sometimes I see it like the King's Court. Other people see it as an ant colony. I saw a presentation 2 weeks ago where someone suggested there was a core commit bureau. They likened it to that. But these power structures do affect your ability to contribute in progress depending on your in or out group status. And if you're a favorite being groomed to be a leader, or if you're expected to just be a supporter. The COVID reaction during 2022 made another schism. About 85% of core contributors, I would estimate, took the COVID side of masking and repeatedly getting boosted and injected and all that, and about 15%, or maybe less, didn't do that. And so you had core dev meetings where they were in separate housing. For years, someone like me who didn't do the vaccines would not be able to visit offices where developers were working because they required you to be boosted and updated with your... So that created another schism, and there was a bit of heavy judgment going on with, why aren't you vaxxed, why aren't you boosted, why aren't you... So that created further separation, and I would say the 15% were the more independent people working alone, and the 85% were the ones in the big city offices, to generalize. Another thing that changed, one of the maintainers repeatedly mentioned the importance of collectivist action, of collectivism in the weekly meetings, which I found that to be very strange for Bitcoin Core. And when I pushed back on that, I was told, well, I said, no, we were ad hoc process. It wasn't collectivist. The people don't have to agree. We don't have to all sign these same things. And I got dunked down on that for questioning that. It got to the point where wagons would circle if you would question the wrong people or report a bug created by the wrong person. If someone friendly to that person had to find the bug and report it. It was all about wagon circling, gaslighting, oh, that's not a bug, and then someone else would fix it quietly. And also how maintainers were chosen. There was a pretense of a democracy. If someone is nominated by an existing maintainer in a meeting, and people would say yes, 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 ack, or someone might question and say, well, I have concerns on the pull request or in the meeting, and you systematically would see these people thereafter pushed away from the project for not being supportive of the nomination. What we did see with one nomination, that was a self-nomination, people immediately all approved during the meeting, and then when the pull request was opened, it was left open for 7 months to rot while they found a way to shut it down. So in fact, maintainerships are pre-decided. It's not based on a vote of the people at the IRC meeting. It's to become a maintainer, you have to be approved by the existing maintainers. It's a little club. And if you question or criticize that, you're not a supportive person, and we've seen these people. And how did they get moved out of the project? Oh, I'm running out of time. Okay, I'm gonna skip forward. Meetings changed, code of conduct, dedicated moderators. They're between a rock and a hard place in core now because what they're really doing is protecting the powerful and not the weak. I'm going to skip forward. Do we need alternative clients with different politics, leadership styles, and selection criteria for perhaps people that have different values, or developers that have different locations that don't want to be in the New York office, or different contexts, or different politics or priorities? Core people might push back and say, well, that disperses the experienced few seasoned reviewers we have. And I would respond that, well, if the new leaders are really looking for loyal, supportive soldiers, you're just going to disenfranchise these people anyway. Let's free them up to be productive on another project rather than them trying to butt their heads getting something moved forward in core. So there's a lot of double standards. This comes down to a question of culture, and I think culture is behind a lot of the online discussions we've had in the last few years. I've compiled a list of things I would like to see in a project if there were to be a new client. I'll just let you read them. I'm going to go real quick because I'm out of time. I would like something similar to the leadership we had with Vladimir van der Laan when he was lead maintainer for a decade. I would like us to be more conservative, break things less, minimize backwards incompatible changes or breaking the API. I'd like us to listen and respect users more. I'd like to see less double standards and more fairness. I'd like to see way less condescension, dunking, ivory tower, big city syndrome, cliques, tribal politics, monoculture. And definitely I'm not into the DEI and the woke. I think hopefully I'm not the only one. I'd like to see minimizing of ego, hubris, and arrogance. Personally, I'd like to see good intentions assumed from the start, whether you're in the in-group or not. There shouldn't even be an in-group. I'd like to see less snark, sneering, smug, snide, sarcastic, dunking, dismissive. In short, a meritocracy, less double standards, silos, and cliques. And I didn't have time to get into it, but there's a communication silo. There's much more opacity in the communication internal into the project. Basically, tough on the code, but easy with the people, fair. Separate, keep the personal out of the professional, keep the identity and the gender and the love and all the friendship stuff out of it. Personally, I don't care whose name is on a change. Do your own work. Don't use others as a proxy. Don't try to game the process. Be careful with the press. The example being the Wall Street Journal hit article a couple, 3 years ago on Bitcoin Core. And basically encourage and support independent developers outside of the centralized offices and outside of the US and Europe. For example, here in El Salvador, but also in the Global South generally. Software for the next 100 years view. Follow best practices. Robustness, like Core does, review, CI, reproducible builds, and fuzzing. I 100% agree that an alternative client needs all that, and that does take resources. Mutual help and goodwill, help other implementations if you find a bug with them. When in doubt, do the conservative thing. Minimize breaking the API. I believe Core is a little bit too liberal with that, but that's my personal opinion. And above all, listen to and carefully respect the user's input on proposed changes. What you can do, I believe that it will be good to decentralize code governance by having more alternative clients and not just one with formerly 96%, now I believe 80 or 78% market share, depending how you define it, of course. Fewer single points of failure, incentivize Bitcoin Core to evolve through healthy competition, and more avenues for users and developers, node runners, to have choice.